The roses were still fresh when I found the receipt. White roses, her favorite, that I'd placed on Mom's grave just that morning for the 3rd anniversary of her death. The receipt was tucked between insurance papers in Dad's desk drawer, and the words hit me like a physical blow. Hillcrest Memorial Gardens. Plot sale minus $8,500, paid in full. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at that piece of paper until the numbers blurred. $8,500. That's what my mother's final resting place was worth to them. Not the memories, not the 3 years I'd been visiting every week, laying flowers and talking to her headstone like she could still hear me. Just a commodity to be sold when they needed quick cash. My hands trembled as I searched through the rest of the papers. There had to be some mistake. Maybe it was for a different plot. Maybe they were buying additional space. But there it was, clear as day. Rebecca Martinez, Plot 47B, Section C, my mother's grave. Sold to Hillcrest Memorial Gardens for immediate resale opportunities. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, though that cut deep enough. It was remembering how they'd comforted me when Mom died. How Dad had held me while I sobbed at the funeral, promising that we'd always have a place to visit her. How my stepmother Sandra had rubbed my back and whispered that Mom would always be watching over us. 3 years of lies. 3 years of me carefully tending to a grave they'd already decided to eliminate. I confronted them that evening over dinner. Sandra was serving her famous pot roast, the one she always made when she wanted to butter Dad up for something. The domesticity of it made the whole situation feel even more surreal. "I found the receipt," I said quietly, placing the paper next to my untouched plate. Dad barely glanced at it. "What receipt, Alex?" "For Mom's grave plot. The one you sold." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Sandra's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down. Dad's jaw tightened in that way it always did when he was about to justify something terrible. "We needed the money," he said finally, cutting his meat with unnecessary force. "The roof needs replacing and Sandra's medical bills from her surgery." "You sold my mother's grave for a roof?" "She's gone, Alex." Sandra's voice was gentle but firm, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Your mother isn't suffering because of this. She's in heaven now. What happens to her earthly remains doesn't change that." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "I visit her every week. And you can still visit her memory," Dad said. "You don't need a specific patch of ground for that. We raised you better than to be tied to material things." Material things. As if my mother's resting place was no different from an old couch they'd decided to donate. As if the headstone I'd helped choose, with her favorite quote from Maya Angelou etched in elegant script, was just clutter they needed to clear out. "Where is she now?" My voice sounded hollow even to me. They exchanged a look. The kind of look that said they'd hoped I'd never ask this question, never dig this deep. "The crematorium," Sandra said softly. "We had her moved. It was respectful, I promise. They handle these transitions all the time." Moved. Like she was furniture being relocated to a storage unit. Like the woman who had raised me, who had stayed up all night when I had pneumonia, who had taught me to drive in empty parking lots while Dad was working, was just an inconvenience that needed relocating. "You had her cremated?" The words came out as a whisper. "The burial plot sale required it," Dad said, and I could hear him getting defensive. "Look, Alex, I know this is hard to understand, but you're 25 years old. You need to start thinking practically about these things. Your mother wouldn't want us going into debt over sentiment." Sentiment. That's what my grief had become to them, an expensive sentiment they couldn't afford to maintain. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "She wanted to be buried next to Grandma Rose. She told me that herself when she was sick. She said she wanted to be close to her mother." "Plans change," Sandra said firmly. "Death is expensive, Alex. The plot maintenance fees alone were costing us hundreds every year. The headstone cleaning, the landscaping requirements. I would have paid for those things." "With what money?" Dad's voice rose slightly. You're still paying off student loans. You're renting that tiny apartment, driving a car that should have been replaced 5 years ago. You want to take on cemetery fees on top of everything else? The truth was, I would have. I would have taken on 2 more jobs if it meant keeping Mom's grave intact. I would have lived on ramen noodles and skipped vacations. But they'd never given me the choice. They'd made this decision in secret. Probably planned it for months, maybe even longer. When did you sell it? Another look between them. More silent communication. 6 months ago, Dad admitted. 6 months. I'd been visiting an empty plot for 6 months, talking to dirt that didn't even hold her anymore. Leaving flowers on ground that had been sold to the highest bidder. The cemetery staff had watched me kneel there week after week, knowing the truth, and said nothing. The headstone? In storage, Sandra said quickly. We kept it. I thought maybe someday you might want it for, I don't know, a memorial garden or something. A memorial garden. In my non-existent backyard, next to my non-existent house that I couldn't afford because I was struggling to make ends meet while they were pocketing $8,000 from my mother's remains. I need to see the contract, I said. Alex, honey, I don't think that's... I need to see the contract. Dad disappeared into his office and returned with a folder. The contract was thorough, professionally prepared. It outlined the sale of Plot 47B, the required relocation of remains, the transfer of all associated rights and responsibilities. At the bottom, both Dad and Sandra had signed. The date was indeed 6 months ago, right around the time I'd started my new job and had been talking about finally being stable enough to maybe contribute to family expenses. They'd been planning this while I was planning to help them. But it was the fine print that made my blood run cold. A clause about, quote, family notification and consent. Apparently, immediate family members were supposed to be informed of any plot sales or remains relocation. There was even a section about how objections could be filed within 30 days of notification. You were supposed to tell me, I said, pointing to the paragraph. It's required by law. We were going to, Sandra said, but you were doing so well, finally getting your life together. We didn't want to upset you. So you've been lying to me for 6 months instead. We've been protecting you, Dad said firmly. This was a business decision, Alex. An adult decision. Your mother is gone. Keeping her in that expensive plot wasn't going to bring her back. Business decision. Adult decision. The same words he'd used when he'd decided to remarry barely a year after Mom's funeral. The same justification he'd given for selling her jewelry to pay for Sandra's engagement ring. Everything about my mother had become a business decision to him. I folded the contract carefully and put it in my purse. I'm going to the cemetery. Alex, please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sandra called after me. What's done is done. But I was already out the door, driving through the evening darkness toward Hillcrest Memorial Gardens, with my mother's sale receipt clutched in my trembling hand. The roses I'd left that morning were probably still there, wilting on top of empty earth while some stranger's loved one was being prepared to take her place. The cemetery was closed, but I parked outside the gates anyway, staring through the iron bars at the shadowy headstones beyond. Somewhere in there was Plot 47B, the space that had held my mother for 2.5 years, before my family decided her presence was too expensive to maintain. I called the cemetery's after-hours number, desperate to talk to someone who might understand. The answering service was polite but firm. All business would need to be conducted during normal operating hours, but something in my voice, some raw desperation, made the operator pause. Honey, are you okay? You sound really upset. And suddenly I was crying, sobbing into my phone to a stranger about how my parents had sold my mother's grave, about how I'd been visiting an empty plot for months, about how the woman who had taught me that family meant everything had been treated like a business expense by the family she'd left behind. The operator listened patiently, making soft, sympathetic noises. When I finally ran out of words, she said something that stopped my tears cold. Honey, what's your mother's name? And what cemetery are you talking about? Rebecca Martinez, I managed. Hillcrest Memorial Gardens. Plot 47B. There was a long pause. Then, hold on just a minute, sweetheart. Let me make a call. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Hillcrest Memorial Gardens, and my heart hammered against my ribs as I answered. Miss Martinez, this is Director Harrison from Hillcrest Memorial. I understand you've had some concerns about your mother's burial plot. His voice was kind but professional, the sort of tone that suggested he'd handled difficult family situations before. I tried to compose myself, but the words tumbled out in a rush. They sold her grave. My parents sold my mother's grave 6 months ago, and I've been visiting an empty plot this whole time, and I don't understand how this could happen without anyone telling me. Miss Martinez, I'm going to need you to come in tomorrow morning. Can you be here at 9? Can you just tell me what happened, please? I found the receipt. I know they got $8,000. I just need to understand. There are some things we need to discuss in person. Bring identification and any documentation you have regarding the plot sale. Ask for me specifically when you arrive. The line went dead, leaving me with more questions than answers. But something in Director Harrison's tone suggested this wasn't just a routine administrative matter. There was an undercurrent of something else, something that made me think tomorrow's meeting would reveal more than just a standard explanation of cemetery policies. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom's face from those last weeks in the hospital, when she'd made me promise to take care of myself and not let grief consume me. She'd also made me promise something else, something I'd thought was just the rambling of pain medication and exhaustion. She'd made me write down a phone number and told me to call it if I ever needed help, if Dad and Sandra ever tried to erase her memory completely. I'd kept that scrap of paper in my wallet for 3 years, assuming it was just a friend from her book club, or maybe a distant relative. The number had a local area code, but I'd never had reason to use it. Now, sitting in my car outside the cemetery at 8:30 the next morning, I pulled out that weathered piece of paper and stared at the faded digits. Director Harrison was waiting for me in the main office, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through whatever facade people tried to present. He gestured for me to sit across from his mahogany desk, which was covered with manila folders and what looked like legal documents. Miss Martinez, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you deserve the truth. Your parents' sale of Plot 47B was legally questionable from the beginning. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Your mother purchased that plot in 2018, 2 years before her death. But she didn't just purchase burial rights. She purchased what we call a perpetual care agreement, which means the plot was to be maintained in perpetuity, regardless of who paid the ongoing fees. He opened one of the folders and showed me a document I'd never seen before. My mother's signature was clear at the bottom, dated just after her cancer diagnosis. But more importantly, your mother designated you as the primary decision-maker for all matters related to her burial and the plot. Your father had no legal authority to sell it without your explicit written consent. The words hit me like a physical blow, but they did sell it. I have the receipt. They sold something, yes, but not what they thought they were selling. Director Harrison's expression was grim. When your father approached us 6 months ago wanting to sell the plot, our staff should have immediately referred him to these documents. Instead, a newer employee processed the request without proper verification. So the sale wasn't legal? The sale was processed improperly. Your mother's remains were moved under false pretenses, and the plot was prepared for resale based on fraudulent authority. He leaned forward. Miss Martinez, your mother was very specific about her wishes. She came to see me personally 3 times during her illness, always without your father present. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker. She was concerned about exactly what ended up happening. She told me she feared your father would remarry quickly and that his new wife might pressure him to eliminate traces of her presence in the family. The accuracy of Mom's prediction was chilling. She'd known Sandra would push for this, had seen it coming even while she was dying. She set up what we call a protective trust arrangement. The plot, the headstone, all maintenance fees were prepaid for 50 years. She also left specific instructions about how her burial was to be handled and what should happen if anyone tried to interfere with those arrangements. Director Harrison handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Mom's familiar handwriting. She asked me to give you this if her burial was ever disturbed. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated just 3 weeks before Mom died, when she was still coherent but growing weaker every day. "My dearest Alex," it began. "If you're reading this, then David and whoever he's married by now have done exactly what I feared. They've tried to erase me, to turn my death into a financial opportunity rather than honoring the life we built together. I'm so sorry you've had to discover their betrayal this way, but I want you to know that I prepared for this possibility." The letter went on to explain that Mom had not only prepaid for her burial arrangements, but had also established a separate account to ensure I would never have to fight for my right to visit her grave or honor her memory. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "I've been watching your father's financial habits for months," she'd written. "He's been hiding debt from both of us, gambling debts and credit card balances, that he's managed to keep secret. I suspect that after I'm gone, he'll face a financial crisis that will make him desperate enough to sell anything valuable, including my burial plot. Sandra doesn't know about the debts yet, but she will, and when she does, she'll push him to liquidate anything that reminds her that she wasn't his first wife." Mom had seen it all coming. The remarriage, the financial pressure, the cold calculation that would lead them to treat her grave as a commodity. "I've arranged for the cemetery to monitor my burial site for any unauthorized changes. If anyone attempts to move my remains or sell the plot without your written consent, Director Harrison has instructions to take immediate action. Alex, I couldn't protect you from losing me, but I can protect you from losing the place where you'll always be able to find me." The letter concluded with an address and account number for a bank I'd never heard of, along with instructions to bring the letter and my identification to access what she called emergency resources I've set aside for you. Director Harrison watched me read, his expression sympathetic but businesslike. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Your mother was thorough, Miss Martinez. The protective trust she established not only covers the burial arrangements, but also includes legal provisions for situations exactly like this one." "What kind of legal provisions?" "Well, for starters, your parents are now liable for the costs of improperly moving your mother's remains, the disruption to cemetery operations, and the emotional distress caused by their fraudulent sale. The trust agreement includes specific penalty clauses for family members who attempt to override the designated decision-maker's authority." He pulled out a calculator and began adding figures. "The improper relocation fee is $15,000. The fraudulent sale penalty is another $20,000. Legal fees for processing the trust violation are $8,000. And then there's the emotional distress compensation, which your mother specifically included after researching similar cases." The numbers kept climbing. By the time he finished calculating, the total was over $60,000. "Your parents sold the plot for $8,500, Director Harrison said quietly. "They now owe the trust $63,000. I stared at the figures, trying to process what this meant. They don't have that kind of money. "I know. Your mother knew too. That's why she included alternative satisfaction clauses in the trust agreement." He showed me another section of the legal documents. "If monetary payment isn't possible, the trust can claim other assets as compensation. Your father's house, cars, investment accounts, anything of value." The scope of Mom's planning was breathtaking. She hadn't just protected her grave, she'd created a legal trap that would spring the moment anyone tried to betray her final wishes. Every contingency had been considered, every loophole closed. "There's one more thing," Director Harrison said, reaching for his phone. "Your mother arranged for immediate notification if her burial was ever disturbed. I was instructed to call a specific number the moment any irregularities occurred." He dialed, put the phone on speaker, and after 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Martinez and Associates, this is Patricia Martinez speaking." My breath caught. Martinez was Mom's maiden name, and Patricia was her older sister who'd moved to California before I was born. The aunt I'd only met a handful of times, who was supposedly a struggling artist living in San Francisco. "Patricia, this is Director Harrison at Hillcrest Memorial. The Rebecca Martinez situation has been activated." "Understood. Is Alex there with you?" "Yes, she's here." "Alex, honey, it's time we talked." My heart pounded as Aunt Patricia's voice filled the cemetery office. I hadn't spoken to her since Mom's funeral. where she'd stayed only briefly and seemed oddly detached from the family drama swirling around Dad's quick engagement to Sandra. "Patricia?" I managed. "I don't understand what's happening." "Oh, sweetheart, your mother and I spent months preparing for this day. She knew exactly what David would do, and she wanted to make sure you'd be protected when it happened." Her voice was warm but carried an edge of steel I'd never heard before. "Are you somewhere private where we can talk freely?" Director Harrison gestured toward a smaller conference room. "You can use my private office. Take all the time you need." Once the door closed, Patricia's tone shifted completely. "Alex, I need you to know that everything you believed about our family's financial situation was carefully constructed fiction. Your mother wasn't just a bookkeeper at that accounting firm. She was a forensic accountant who specialized in asset protection and financial investigation." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "She discovered your father's gambling debts 2 years before she died. Not just small stuff, Alex. He owed over $150,000 to some very dangerous people. The kind of people who don't just send collection letters." My legs felt weak. I sank into Director Harrison's leather chair, trying to process this revelation. But he seemed so stable, so responsible. He was good at hiding it, but your mother was better at finding hidden things. She spent her last 2 years quietly protecting every asset she could, making sure David's debts couldn't touch anything that was meant for you. Patricia's voice softened slightly. "The house you grew up in? It's not in David's name anymore. Your mother transferred ownership to a trust with you as the beneficiary 3 months before she died. The car he drives, the investment accounts he thinks Sandra will inherit someday, even his life insurance policy, all transferred or restructured. Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she was dying, honey. And she wanted your last conversations to be about love, not money and legal battles. She made me promise to handle the business side so you could just be her daughter, not her financial advisor." Through the office window, I could see visitors moving quietly between headstones, carrying flowers and small mementos. Normal people doing normal things, unaware that in this small room my entire understanding of my family was being turned upside down. "There's more, Alex. Your mother didn't just protect her burial plot. She created what she called a comprehensive accountability system. Every time David or Sandra made a decision that violated her wishes or hurt you, it triggered financial consequences they didn't even know existed." Patricia explained that Mom had documented every conversation, every promise Dad had made about honoring her memory and taking care of me. She'd recorded Sandra's early comments about moving forward and not living in the past. Everything had been carefully preserved and legally notarized. The grave plot sale was the final trigger. It activated everything your mother had put in place. "What do you mean, everything?" "Well, let's start with the house. Since David violated the terms of the trust by selling your mother's burial plot without your consent, ownership of the family home immediately transfers to you. He and Sandra have 30 days to vacate." The irony was staggering. They'd sold Mom's resting place for $8,000, and in doing so, they'd lost their own home. The gambling debts are also coming due. Your mother had been quietly paying the minimum amounts to keep David's creditors at bay, but that arrangement expires the moment anyone disturbs her burial. As of yesterday, when they moved her remains, those creditors have been notified that their payments are stopping. She was protecting him even while planning for this? She loved him once, Alex. Enough to shield him from his own mistakes, but not enough to let him destroy everything she'd built for you. Patricia walked me through the rest of Mom's plan. The mysterious bank account contained not just money, but a complete dossier of Dad's financial crimes. Forged documents, hidden assets, tax evasion that went back years. Everything Mom had discovered during her investigation, everything she'd quietly documented while pretending to be a simple bookkeeper dying of cancer. Your mother gave them every opportunity to do the right thing. She could have exposed David's gambling and financial fraud at any time. Instead, she created a system that would only activate if they proved they couldn't be trusted with her memory or her daughter's well-being. The weight of Mom's sacrifice hit me then. She'd spent her final months not just battling cancer, but constructing an elaborate safety net that would only deploy if I needed it. She'd died hoping she was wrong about Dad, hoping the trap she'd built would never be necessary. 2 hours later, I drove back to Dad and Sandra's house with a folder full of documents and a phone number for the lawyer Mom had retained. Patricia had given me clear instructions about what would happen next, but I wanted to see their faces when reality hit. They were in the living room when I walked in, Sandra reading a magazine while Dad watched television. The picture of domestic contentment, built on the sale of my mother's grave and the proceeds of financial fraud they thought would never be discovered. "We need to talk," I said, placing the folder on their coffee table. Dad glanced at the legal documents spilling out. "What's all this?" "Consequences." I pulled out the trust documents and laid them where both could see. "Mom knew you'd sell her grave. She planned for it." Sandra's face went pale as she read the first page. "This can't be legal. It's completely legal. And now, it's active." I sat across from them, feeling strangely calm despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. "You sold Mom's burial plot for $8,000. In doing so, you've triggered penalty clauses that make you liable for $63,000 in damages to her estate." "We don't have that kind of money," Dad said. But his voice had gone quiet. "I know. Mom knew too. That's why the trust includes alternative satisfaction methods." I pulled out the property transfer documents. "This house now belongs to me. You have 30 days to move out." The explosion I expected didn't come. Instead, Dad just stared at the papers with a look I'd never seen before. Not anger, not surprise, but something closer to resignation. "She knew," he said quietly. "She knew about the gambling debts, the forged tax returns, the money you borrowed against the house without telling her. She knew about all of it, Dad. And she protected you anyway, right up until you proved you didn't deserve protection." Sandra was crying now, but not the manipulative tears she'd used when trying to justify selling the grave plot. These were the tears of someone who'd finally realized the scope of their miscalculation. "She also knew about the creditors you've been avoiding," I continued. "The payments she was making to keep them quiet stopped yesterday. They'll be contacting you directly now." Dad's face crumbled. "Alex, you don't understand the kind of people." "I understand perfectly. Mom spent 2 years understanding them while you pretended they didn't exist." I stood up, leaving the documents scattered across their coffee table like pieces of a broken life. "She gave you every chance to be honest, to include me in decisions about her burial, to treat her memory with respect. You chose to treat her grave like a commodity." "Where are we supposed to go?" Sandra asked, her voice small. The question hung in the air, and for a moment I felt an echo of the power Mom must have felt when she planned this whole elaborate consequence. The power to choose mercy or justice, forgiveness or accountability. "That's something you'll need to figure out," I said finally. "You're adults. You made adult decisions. Now you get to live with adult consequences." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mom's remains are being moved back to Plot 47B tomorrow. The headstone is being reinstalled, and the perpetual care agreement is being honored exactly as she intended. If you want to visit her grave and apologize for what you did, you're welcome to. But you'll need to ask permission first." "Ask permission from who?" Dad called after me. "From me. It's my cemetery plot now." The next morning, I stood in Hillcrest Memorial Gardens watching cemetery workers carefully relocate Mom's remains back to Plot 47B. Director Harrison supervised personally, ensuring every detail met the standards Mom had specified in her trust documents. "She would be proud of you," he said as workers positioned her headstone back in its proper place. "She would be sad it came to this," I replied. "But yes, I think she'd be proud." Patricia arrived from California that afternoon, bringing boxes of Mom's papers and photographs that she'd been storing. We spent the evening in my newly acquired childhood home, going through memories and legal documents, planning how to manage the assets Mom had carefully preserved. "What will you do with the house?" Patricia asked. I looked around the living room where I'd grown up, where Mom had read me bedtime stories and helped with homework, where Dad and Sandra had callously planned to sell her grave while eating dinner at her old kitchen table. I think I'll rent it out, I said. Use the income to maintain Mom's grave and maybe help other people whose families have tried to erase their loved ones' memories. Very fitting. Your mother always said the best revenge was living well. Dad and Sandra moved out 2 weeks later, loading their belongings into a rented truck while I watched from Mom's garden. Dad approached me as I was watering her rose bushes, the same white roses I'd been leaving on her grave every week. Alex, I know I can't undo what we did, but I want you to know I loved your mother. I know you did, Dad, but love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day. You chose to stop making it. He stood there for a long moment, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Will you ever forgive me? Maybe someday, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen. They drove away that afternoon, and I never saw them again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd moved to another state, that Dad had filed for bankruptcy, that Sandra had left him when the full scope of his debts became clear. Mom had been right about everything. I kept her grave beautifully maintained, visiting every week with fresh white roses. Sometimes I brought friends. Sometimes I sat alone and told her about my life, my job, the man I was dating, who understood why I needed to honor her memory this way. The headstone gleamed in the afternoon sun, her favorite Maya Angelou quote, etched in elegant script. A great soul serves everyone all the time. Below that, in smaller letters, an addition I'd made. Beloved mother, fierce protector, master planner. She'd served everyone, even in death. She'd served me by protecting my inheritance and my right to grieve. She'd served Dad by shielding him from his creditors as long as he honored her wishes. She'd even served Sandra by giving her multiple chances to encourage Dad to do the right thing. But when they proved unworthy of her service, she'd serve justice instead. 6 months later, I received a card in the mail. No return address, but I recognized Sandra's handwriting. Inside was a simple message. I'm sorry. You were right about everything. I filed it away with Mom's papers and drove to the cemetery with white roses and a heart full of gratitude for a woman who'd loved me enough to fight for my future, even from the grave. 3 years have passed since that transformative day in Director Harrison's office, and my life looks completely different now. The house I grew up in has become a sanctuary again, filled with warmth and laughter instead of cold calculation. I've turned Mom's old sewing room into a home office, where I work as a victim's advocate, helping families navigate legal battles when loved ones try to exploit grief for financial gain. The rental income from the second property I purchased with Mom's trust fund goes directly into a foundation I established called the Martinez Memorial Fund. It provides legal assistance to people whose family members have tried to desecrate graves, sell burial plots without permission, or otherwise profit from death. We've helped 47 families so far, and the number keeps growing. Patricia visits twice a year, usually around Mom's birthday and the anniversary of her death. We've grown closer than I ever imagined possible, and she's taught me about the strength that runs in our family's women. Mom's planning wasn't just about protecting me from Dad's betrayal. It was about teaching me that sometimes love requires fierce boundaries and strategic thinking. The cemetery plot remains exactly as Mom intended, surrounded by the white rose bushes I planted last spring. Director Harrison retired last year, but not before training his replacement on the importance of honoring burial wishes and protecting family rights. He still stops by occasionally to check on the memorial garden that's become something of a landmark at Hillcrest. As for Dad and Sandra, I heard through distant relatives that they eventually reconciled after hitting rock bottom together. They're working modest jobs in Arizona now, living quietly and apparently staying out of trouble. I genuinely hope they've found peace, though I have no desire to rebuild a relationship built on their terms. The most surprising outcome has been the relationships I've built with other families who've faced similar betrayals. There's an unexpected community of people who understand what it feels like to have grief weaponized against you, and we support each other through the complicated process of healing while seeking justice. Mom's grave has become a place of pilgrimage for some of these families. They leave flowers and notes, drawing strength from her story and the precedent her careful planning set for protecting burial rights. I never expected her final resting place to become a symbol of resistance against family exploitation, but I think she would approve. Every week when I visit, I update her on the Foundation's work and the lives we've managed to touch. I tell her about the grandfather whose son tried to sell his wife's mausoleum, the daughter whose stepmother attempted to have her father's remains moved to make room for her own family plot. Each case reminds me that Mom's situation wasn't unique, but her response to it certainly was. The trust fund continues to grow, managed by Patricia and the law firm Mom carefully selected. We use it not just for legal assistance, but for education about burial rights and estate planning. Knowledge is power, and Mom believed that information shared widely could prevent the kind of betrayal I experienced. Sometimes people ask if I regret how everything unfolded, if I wish I'd tried harder to repair the relationship with Dad and Sandra. The answer is always the same. I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret holding them accountable for their choices. Mom taught me that enabling bad behavior isn't kindness, it's just another form of harm. The white roses on her grave bloom twice a year now, more beautiful than ever, in soil that's been blessed by justice served and love honored. She rests peacefully in the exact spot she chose, surrounded by the perpetual care she arranged, watched over by the daughter she empowered to fight for what's right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.